5 members in attendance, so we do have a quorum to be able to vote. So that is good.
And we are.
Okay, perfect. All right. Hello, everyone.
We are here today for the September meeting of the Passive Recreation Lands Subcommittee.
I will pass it over to our chair, Kevin Conricode, to start the agenda.
How's everybody doing today? We're going to do a quick roll call, and we can go clockwise, starting with Jill.
Yep. Jill Carter, I'm the Open Space Bond Project Manager and the Secretary for the subcommittee.
Gail, Planning Conservation Advisory Board and Passive Recreation Subcommittee.
I'm Kevin Conricode, Passive Recreation Subcommittee Chair and member of the Montgomery County Parks and Advisory Board.
Allison Baines, Captain Recreation.
And those of us online, don't trample over each other, but could you please sound off?
I'm Ann Babcock.
That's
And we can't hear you. Is
says
this
it's muted on the screen there down there.
1 second, please? Okay, can you try talking again real quick?
Okay. I'm Ann Babcock, a member of the Passive Recreation
Still not
Committee.
Sorry, different room, different technology always presents some issues.
There's an echo. It's very hard to hear.
I mean, I can unmute my computer speakers if you think that will.
No,
Speakers on the left.
issue. Let's try now.
And can you try speaking again really quickly?
I'm Ann Babcock.
No, it's still not coming through. All right. What if I just try and put my speakers on my personal computer on? Would that work for now?
Let's see.
Yeah,
Okay.
you sound much better, Jill, just with you talking on your computer.
I don't know how well the sound will be, but we'll try. All right.
Jill, you sounded pretty good there now. There's no reverb.
Okay. I think we're going to use my personal computer's speakers, so it will be a little soft. So please speak loudly if you're online, and we can restart with the online roll call.
You want me to go again?
Yes, please. Sorry about that, Ann.
Okay. I'm Ann Babcock. I'm a member of the Passive Recreation Subcommittee.
I'm Bob Turner. I'm also a member of the Passive Rec and LCAP.
Matt Fusco, landscape architect, Land Conservation Advisory Board and Passive Lands Recreation Committee.
And that leaves Jennifer as our last person.
Jennifer Harrison, Everything Resources.
I'm glad everybody is here. I'm going to make a motion to approve September 2023's agenda notes and minutes.
Make motion.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
All right, and I kind of jumped over a step of approving the agenda for today's meeting. All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Jill, would you like me to pass the meeting to you?
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. All right. So as you all must know, we called for this special meeting to move up the September meeting of the subcommittee in order to review the refined criteria and hopefully vote to approve it. So as such, I did share these slides yesterday, and I'll go through them now to share the criteria and what they look like currently. All right, so as I mentioned in the last meeting, the evaluation criteria first has a set of qualifying criteria for all projects. These are answered as a yes or no question, and they are project scheduling and timeline. So the project must be able to be completed within the timeline restrictions of the bond. As a refresher, the bond gives us 7 years to allocate the funding with an option to extend to 10 years. So we need to be able to, those projects need to have their budgets ready and be able to have that funding allocated within that 7 to 10 year timeframe. The geographic location of the project must be within Buncombe County. And then finally, the projects need to have a plan in place for long-term maintenance and management. This next slide for the weighted criteria is what was shared in the August meeting. As a reminder, we had conservation and environmental impact weighted at 20%, accessibility at 18%, feasibility at 17%, equity at 15%, long-term management and maintenance at 10%, cost and leverage funding at 10%, and alignment with county plans, needs, and other priorities at 5%, and finally, safety at 5%. Just as a quick recap of what was discussed at the previous meeting, there was a request that we add some higher weight to the feasibility criteria, recognizing the preference for getting projects completed and done and open to the public in a timely manner. In response to that feedback, we did ask, what were some areas that the subcommittee felt weight could be taken from. There were some recommendations around, there's overlap between accessibility and equity, and that might be one area. Another piece of feedback that we received was around long-term management and maintenance and how that differentiates between the qualifying criteria and the evaluation criteria, and also the inclusion of those costs in the cost and leveraged funding piece. Just a quick clarification of how the staff was thinking, but I definitely want to hear if there's other questions and concerns around that piece. But the qualifying criteria requires that a long-term management and maintenance plan exists. It doesn't necessarily speak to the quality of that plan or the feasibility of that plan, but the fact that there needs to be a plan in place. Whereas with the weighted criteria, we will be looking more at the kind of details of what is included in that long-term management and maintenance plan. And those plans that are more detailed, more feasible, will receive a higher score for long-term management and maintenance than those that, don't necessarily have a detailed plan. Additionally, the cost and leverage funding piece, as you may remember, and I can pull it up, there we had the costs of long-term management and maintenance were included in that criteria, and that was raised as a question as well. This is really just the cost for that long-term management and maintenance, not necessarily what the activities are themselves, but obviously maintaining trails, staffing parks, and other forms of management and maintenance do cost something. And we want to see what the considerations are for those long-term costs in the total budget and cost and leverage funding aspect of the project. Before I show how the criteria has been refined, which I just did that, sorry, I did want to pause and ask if we had any more questions around that long-term management and maintenance concern. Okay, hearing none. So hearing the feedback that we received from this subcommittee and kind of ideas of how that could be implemented, the criteria was refined further. The qualifying criteria remains the same. It is still the 3 yes or no questions. But for the weighted criteria, We removed the 3% from the accessibility criterion weight and added that to the feasibility criterion weight. And so in this refined criteria, again, we have conservation environmental impact at 20%, followed by feasibility at 20%, accessibility at 15%, equity at 15%, long-term management and maintenance at 10%, cost and leverage funding at 10%, alignment with county plans, needs, and other priorities at 5%, and safety at 5%. Again, unlike the qualifying criteria, this weighted criteria is scored on a scale. So how well a project meets one of these criterion will determine how much of that percentage they receive. So if a project does a really great job of making sure that they are minimizing the negative environmental impact and they're doing a lot towards conservation, it might receive closer to 20% for that score, whereas a project that doesn't really prioritize that aspect would receive a lower conservation environmental impact score.
And we'll have a rubric on that once we get the application for how each of those points will be scored.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll walk through again kind of what are kind of the illustrative pieces included in each of these criteria. But as Jennifer mentioned, there will be a rubric by how the group scores projects, and it'll include, what all is considered in things like feasibility versus equity versus cost.
But also like what's 5 points,
Right.
what's 2-3 points, so it'll all be outlined.
Thank you, Jen. Before I move into kind of the details of each of these pieces, were there any initial thoughts or questions about this refined criteria? And all right, you guys are being, great.
No question.
Awesome. All right, to just talk a little bit more again about what are the kinds of elements that we would be looking at for each of these pieces. For conservation environmental impact, we aren't just thinking about this as, minimizing the negative impacts, but we're thinking about the positive conservation environmental impact as well. So does it include things like protection of wildlife habits or habitats or native species? Does it contribute to wildlife corridors or contiguous plots of conserved lands? Also looking at things like tree canopy and preservation and restoration and its contribution to ecosystem and biodiversity. For accessibility, this includes both ADA accessibility, making sure that everyone can enjoy these areas regardless of their physical abilities, but also how accessible is this project to our community? Is it proximate to public transportation? Is it close to downtown areas or other population hubs? Also, what is the walkability and bikeability to these areas look like? Is there availability for parking where applicable? How is it accessible to our senior population? For feasibility, this really talks about how, effectively and quickly the project can get done. So what is its status in terms of design or land ownership or implementation? For those projects that might be a land acquisition instead of a park, these requirements will obviously look differently, but are we far along in that land ownership question? Might be an acquisition piece that we want to look at. What need is there for new structures that are intensive in terms of their constructions, things like bridges and bathhouses? How long do we think it'll take until this project, as ideated in the proposal, can be completed? Is there a feasibility study in place, and how complete or old is that feasibility study? And also, what does the support from relevant stakeholders and the surrounding community look like? We want to make sure that, if there is that community support, that obviously makes it easier to get this project done, as opposed to having to kind of buy in that community support once the project has received funding. Also, I didn't say this, but if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask them as I go along. Equity, this is a bit different from accessibility because we're specifically focused here on serving traditionally underserved communities. We want to make sure that we want to support projects that are close to, low income and senior housing. We want to make sure that the surrounding community is engaged in project design and implementation, that it is, considering things like cultural and historical significance. And we also want to make sure that we're mitigating the potential negative impacts of these projects. So things such as like traffic or noise and light pollution. Also, gentrification is obviously a big concern in our community as well. And finally, with equity, thinking about areas that don't have access to these types of projects and these types of lands, and how can we support projects that are located in those areas. For the management and maintenance question, again, while we have having a long-term management and maintenance plan in place as a qualifying criteria, we want to make sure that we're giving more weight to those projects that have, detailed plans for things like invasive species management, trash and litter management. They, might not have as high of needs for on-site staff, or if they do, they already have plans in place for how they're going to staff that project. What is the plan for trail maintenance, erosion control? How is the community engaged in keeping the park or the land well maintained? And also, are there experienced land managers involved in the project? For cost and leveraged funding, again, we want to, use these bond funds wisely and efficiently, and where possible, combine them with other funding sources. So are there other funding that's being leveraged for these projects, and how much of that? With regards to costs, are they efficiently allocating those costs? Are they having up-to-date project cost estimates? Obviously, in our current situation, the costs of construction and development and things are going up. And so how out of date or up to date are those estimates? Have they thought about different planning level contingencies based on how much funding is available, or what are kind of the low cost options? And then with the bond funds, would the project be fully funded, or is there still a gap in place? And then finally, like I mentioned before, that long-term management and maintenance piece does cost it in its own. So what is their plan for managing those costs and funding them? Alignment with county plans and needs. We have, our county comprehensive plan that was just finalized. So how does these projects align with that plan, but also how do they align with the Parks and Recreation Master Plan or other strategies that the county has? Beyond just the county's plans and strategies, does it align with other regional and municipal plans? Does it contribute to regional wildlife conservation strategies? And we did want to leave some flexibility such that if it's identified as a new need or a new priority, but it's not an existing plan, we can still give it some weight there as well. And then finally, safety. Is the project going to mitigate against conflict between different users of trails? Such, there's always potential danger between when bikes and hikers and horses and whatnot are all on the same trail. So what does that look like for mitigating that conflict? Also, what's the considerations for crime prevention? Is there clear signage, and is the park easy to use and navigate? What is the project considering with regards to wildlife encounters and safety in that? And then finally, things like rest and shade and making sure that people can keep themselves safe while they're out there. So those are, again, those illustrative components of each of these criteria, and they will be, further fleshed out for the scoring process as well. And make sure that we, as Jennifer said, we have kind of a scale of what does a a project that gets the full 5% for safety look like versus a project that only gets 2%? What is it going to have versus not have? But any questions, thoughts, concerns on these detailed components of the criteria?
I have one comment. Jill, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
In my car, as you can tell. First of all, you did a great job pulling this together. This is really clear, really nicely done. I think you probably plan on like adding this slide presentation to, as you solicit RFPs or how we're going to do that, so that if it's a land trust or whatever organization coming to us, they can see how they'll score. They've got to answer these questions. And I think you've been pretty clear in kind of helping us pull together what those questions are going to be. But what's the process now, do you see, for, is it an RFP process? We're going to set certain dates every year when they need to submit these things by so that we can review them together? Or is it just going to be review them as they come kind of thing?
So for the passive recreation lands, we will have an open application window. Right now, the goal is to open that in early calendar year 2024. It'll probably be open for a couple months, and then it'll have a deadline. And projects that are interested in submitting during that window will need to submit their proposals by that deadline. And then we will have a project review process. The way our staff has talked about it is that we do want to have kind of a committee of staff members that are scoring projects using these criteria. And those will include staff members, that have the kind of relevant expertise, people from planning, probably someone from Parks and Recreation, and so on. And then once the projects receive scores, they'll then come to this subcommittee. You'll review the projects, you'll review their scores, you'll have the opportunity to ask more questions, both of the staff and of the applicants. And then the subcommittee will make recommendations on which projects you would like to put before the commissioners. Now, we do anticipate that we will probably have multiple application windows, just based on what the quality of projects and how many projects come forward. We don't want the subcommittee to feel like you have to spend all of the money right away if you don't have projects that you are excited about recommending. And if that's the case, if we have more money after the first application window, then we would open a second one later on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. So your staff are going to use these criteria to evaluate and score. We are also, as a subcommittee here, going to use the same criteria and score it ourselves, right? Is that correct?
So our thinking is that the staff will do the scoring, and then this subcommittee will review those scores and why they were scored that way. So you'll be able to see, what a given project's feasibility score was, and you'll be able to ask the staff, questions about the projects themselves and about their scores, as well as ask the applicants. But scoring these projects is going to involve a lot of diving deep into the different proposal documents and things. And so we did feel like having that committee of staff members do the scoring, and then the subcommittee reviewing the scores, asking questions, and then selecting which projects they'd like to recommend to move forward, knowing that this evaluation criteria is kind of how those scores shaped up. That's our process that we've envisioned.
Question, do you envision people that are wanting their property to be, qualify under this would be giving a presentation to us, or would the staff be giving a summary presentation about all, why they're bringing this forward and all?
That's a great question. I think, we could do it either way. And depending on how many projects come forward, if this subcommittee, only wants to see the top scoring projects and have a more detailed presentation on those, we can do it that way. I mean, if there's only 5 project applications that come forward in the first window, it might, make more sense that everyone does a formal
Right,
presentation to the
right.
subcommittee.
It's been real helpful, Land Conservation Advisory Board, because we just have 3 land trusts basically that bring these forward, and they've done all the work. So they've put together a presentation to give to us, and they know the time we have in our meeting. So that's been real convenient, but I could see how if you had too many of them, yeah, maybe it would have to be the time. We could discuss that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Advisory, the landowners come in, they present, we present the project,
Right.
right? And then the landowner is there to answer questions and go over
Right.
the details of the project and, but after staff scores and brings, and the site visit happens, it's very similar to, LCAB, and that could easily, be. The question is, do you want a minimum score or something like that, that would bring that in front of the committee? Well, we know that if they answer no to any of those first 3 questions.
Then they're already
it's
out.
Already, and then is there some cutoff point at which you say, yeah, we don't need to spend time reviewing the project?
Right. Or if you need to improve it and bring it back later or something, maybe, because, yeah, okay.
And
Thank you.
yeah, of course. And I think that's something that, the subcommittee can definitely weigh on. And if you want to see presentations for all the projects, then we can organize that and make that happen. Or as Jennifer said, if you only want to see something that scores above the 70 or whatnot, then we can also limit that as well.
Jill, I missed a little bit of that because I can't hear very well on Zoom, but did you say anything about visiting the site, and would that be acceptable or ethical to do that?
So we do intend for part of the project review process to include site visits, especially for those, like if we wanted to do that minimum score thing, then the ones that scored above that, we would do site visits for those, similar to, again, how the Land Conservation Advisory Board has site visits for projects that go through that process. That would be kind of a formalized thing within the project evaluation. So we would want to make sure that happens, as a subcommittee, that there's not side visits to projects happening with individual members. We want to make sure it's all kind of going by the books and the formalized process, but we do envision there being site visits.
Well, with LCAP, sometimes, optimally, everybody would like to see it, but quite often people's schedules don't allow it. Sometimes only one of the committee members has been able to go there. But that's been very helpful when they report, hey, I saw this and I saw this. And so that helps the other committee members. So to what you just said, I don't think it needs to be everybody always has to. The whole committee has to always go to the site visits as long as somebody can.
Right. I'm just saying we want to make sure that whether it be one committee member or multiple committee members, it's just done through the formal project selection process and not,
All right.
somebody going off and saying, I'm going to do a site, not that I didn't do it, but
Right.
someone going off and saying, I'm going to do a site
Right.
visit on my own because I'm curious kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's sweet.
This is a good time to remind you that this is your subcommittee.
Yeah.
And so it will happen however you want it to happen. So if you decide as a committee that you want to see every application, if you decide as a committee you want to score the application, if you decide you want site visit, I mean, this is up for you. We're the staff. You provide us the guidance. We can make you suggestions
Right.
and let you know, hey, here's how we've done it in other instances. But it is you are completely empowered as a board to tell us how you want it done.
And to that point, Bob Turner, I know this was part of your question, but if you guys do want the committee to also score in addition to the staff, as Jennifer mentioned, like that's an option. That is just our staff recommendation, was we want to make sure there is a staff that's kind of reviewing these proposals, but if the subcommittee also wants to give its own score, we can do that as well.
I think the current proposed method sounds good. If the submissions are underwhelming, then it's a small enough number, and then like we can, as a committee, dive deeper into each one. But if there is a large number of applications, I think having staff go through, apply the criteria, and then just bring us the ones that are feasible. In what we put outlined here.
I would agree with that. I don't know what folks on the Zoom think.
I didn't hear all that, but it seems to me that it sounded like what Kevin was saying, bring the most important projects from staff. I think it would certainly be helpful to see the ones that didn't make the cut.
Mhm.
And I think from an efficiency standpoint, having staff score and then maybe present to us their findings as opposed to trying to have each individual project come in might be a good way to start. And if we find that we're not getting enough information from staff, then we could ask additional questions that they could respond to. Seems like it could get cumbersome if we have 7 projects that meet the criteria and we need to hear from 7 different project teams to understand that better. My experience with planning and development, the staff is going to do a pretty thorough review based on county, state, whatever requirements, and then they could give us a synopsis that then we can take that information, and if we need additional information, request it.
Great. Thank you, Matt. So I guess as a reminder, our kind of ask for this meeting was if the subcommittee likes the criteria and approves of the criteria to vote to approve it. But I did want to pause, and if there's any other questions or concerns with the criteria, we can talk those out as well. Or with the process. Doesn't have to be just the criteria.
I think you've done an excellent job.
Yeah.
Outlining the criteria, outlining the application, review process. Seems very straightforward and well done.
Thank you. Appreciate
I would make a motion to approve the criteria as presented today, if that's appropriate at this time.
I would second that as well, Matt.
All right, all in favor of approving the criteria as presented?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right.
It's unanimous.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Did a nice job, Joe.
And so now that the criteria has been approved, just as a reminder on next steps, it does need to go before the Board of Commissioners for a formal adoption. So we will be having those presentations hopefully in the next month, and hopefully be able to get them formally approved by this time in October. And then, yeah. And part of that process, we will be bringing the criteria before the Environmental and Energy Subcommittee next week on the 15th to get their feedback and thoughts. That meeting is also open to the public, so if any of you want to listen in, you're welcome to do that too. And then, as I mentioned before, we do anticipate opening the application window in early 2024. And so this subcommittee will definitely be consulted over the next few months about that process and, specific feedback you might have on the application process or, requests and how that review happens as well.
Jill,
Yes.
I was wondering if maybe before we started considering these applications, if at one point in one of our meetings before then, we could have Terry Wells or maybe somebody from the county commissioners come and just speak to us about their vision and what they were hoping to accomplish with this bond.
Okay. I can certainly talk to county management and see if we can have one of the commissioners join for a future meeting.
Would that be there's this is a subcommittee for 1/3 of that bond? Is there a meeting where we could get all stakeholders of oversight to the bond?
It's like a meeting of the committees, I guess.
So what are we trying to achieve with that? Because once we have the criteria adopted, we know what the projects are, we know the parameters. So I'm just wondering, Would we want that before? I mean, you already.
Before, oh, yeah, I mean, that's a fair
Yeah.
question.
It would have been
Yeah.
more appropriate earlier. in the
Maybe,
process.
I'm just wondering.
So I'm not sure I totally understood it either. I mean, I feel like they passed the bond and we're part of the result of that. This was part of what they wanted. I think I know, I guess I thought I knew what the county kind of wanted, what their goal was, is protecting passive recreation parks that don't involve as much structure and funding and all that.
I think there is the question of land acquisition versus programming,
Yeah,
perhaps.
that's true.
Like, is one weighted more than the other?
That
I
would
think
be,
that's also your recommendation to you as you know, representatives of the community, knowing what you suggest to the commissioners for consideration.
Do you guys have thoughts on that?
And so you made that suggestion, is there some more clarity that you feel that you need in order to be able to move forward?
Well, I was just thinking, now we've got a lot to think about as far as the weights of the weighted criteria, certainly not the qualifying, but the weighted criteria is something that's going to vary with each one of the applications. And I think just listening to them and hearing what they envisioned with this whole idea would help us as we evaluate the different weighted criteria.
I guess I understand that. I guess I feel like they passed the bond, they had general goals, and it's our job to do that. Review the weighted criteria and make the recommendations to them. I think they would be happy if we did all of that, our job that way, and gave those recommendations. Then they would think that's what they want. That's what I've been envisioning, and maybe I'm wrong there, but
And that is how the process worked for both conservation and greenways, where the staff and the subcommittee worked together or the staff and the boards worked together to come up with the evaluation criteria and kind of what that means for the desired projects to be funded by the bond. And then that criteria was brought before the commissioners. And for both of those, the commissioners did have feedback on the criteria itself. And then that was implemented into the final adopted criteria. So again, that's the process we used for the conservation easements and greenways. And that's been the process we've been pursuing for this as well. So I do think if based on this evaluation criteria, if the subcommittees are approving it to go forward before the Board of Commissioners, if they have feedback on the criteria because it doesn't necessarily align with their thinking, we would hear that and obviously need to reconvene as a subcommittee again to talk about what that means for the subcommittee's recommendations.
Okay.
Does that feel good to you, Anne?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. I did want to you had a question about convening all of the subcommittees. Can you talk about
I was
that?
just saying, if we were going to bring the county commissioner in, it would make more sense to do it holistically rather than for each individual meeting.
Yeah.
But I agree with the assessment. That would have been really nice to do early.
Before
Yeah.
this process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No comment, really, just mentioning.
Hey, Jill, one question here, Bob Turner. I would love to be able to see if you can dig it up and email us what the actual language was on the bond referendum that the voters saw. So that
Okay.
we're making sure we followed what everybody voted for. You know, just I'd love to see the language. I can't remember it. You know, I voted for it, but I can't remember what it actually said on the bond, you know?
Yeah, I can
the-
certainly
ballot.
share that with this group as well. Yep.
probably on a county website or something somewhere.
Yeah,
Might be.
it's pretty short to be honest. But I will definitely share that with this group. Great. Well, we're still feeling good though about moving the criteria forward through the process.
Yes.
Okay. Well, then with that, that's the end of my presentation, so we can move forward.
All right, we went over the public comment period or
Yeah.
interim. Yeah. The next meeting will be October 17th at noon, same building.
Yes, and that one should be in room 310, which is where we normally have these meetings. Let me just, yeah.
So do we have an agenda for next meeting? If we won't have applications. So I think it's a valid question to ask, does this committee need to continue meeting right now? Or do we have to open it up, get some things to bring back to you?
That is a great question. I would say my personal preference would be that we, for now, keep it on the calendar just in case the commissioners do have feedback on the criteria and want it changed. And that way we already have a meeting of this subcommittee scheduled in case we need to change the criteria. And then if they don't have any feedback and they're fine with the criteria as is, we can revisit, or we can talk about potentially canceling that meeting and waiting until we have a more fleshed out agenda to discuss.
Sure. Okay, so a tentative next meeting on October 17th, pending an agenda.
Yes, pending an agenda.
And other than that, a motion to adjourn today's meeting.
Second.
All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Everybody.